Rain slipped through the upper sails of Orpheum in silver threads, turning the glass walkways into mirrors that shimmered with the reflection of teal waves far below. Cade Rowan lifted the shutter of his spice stall, the hinges groaning softly in the wet air, and breathed in the familiar scent of frozen seed and metal dust. The market was still half asleep, its neon strips flickering weakly against the morning haze. Traders muttered behind half-closed booths, voices low and tired. He liked it this way, quiet, unhurried, before the noise of barter drowned out thought. He reached for the ledger, started checking the jars, when a shadow lingered at the edge of his vision. A figure stood just beyond the awning, unmoving in the drizzle, watching him. Cade straightened, hand still on the counter. A woman stepped forward. Her skin was a deep violet sheen beneath the rain, green hair slicked against her shoulders, clothes threadbare and clinging. She looked half-drowned, half-haunted. When she spoke, her voice was steady but hollow, like someone who had already run out of shame. In bed, in the shower, day or night. I'll do anything. Hire me, human. Let me stay. The words hit the air like a dropped blade, clean and final. Cade didn't answer right away. The city hummed around them, the low thrum of the pylons, the hiss of rain against glass, but between them there was only the sound of her breathing, sharp and uneven. He'd heard offers like that before in other corners of the galaxy, from people who'd lost more than money. She didn't flinch or look away, just stood there clutching a small pack to her chest, water dripping from her chin. He set his ledger down slowly. "That's not the kind of job I'm hiring for," he said. Her eyes flickered, not with surprise, but with a quiet collapse of expectation. He waited a moment, then added, "But if you can work, I've got shelves that need cleaning and stock that needs sorting." The silence stretched, uncertain, before she nodded once. "You'd let me stay? If you don't cause trouble." He reached under the counter and pulled out an old linen shirt, folded and clean. "Put this on," he said. "Not because I care what you're wearing, but because the kind of men who walk by here will." Her hands trembled when she took it. "Thank you," she whispered, as if the word itself were fragile. He turned away to give her space. When he looked back, she'd tied the shirt around her waist and was standing by the table, waiting. "Start with these," he said, sliding a tray of resin cones toward her. "Wipe each one, check for cracks. No talking needed." She nodded and began to work, moving carefully, almost reverently, as though each small task might decide her fate. Cade watched her for a while, pretending not to. She was efficient, focused, but the way she flinched at sudden sounds told him more than her words ever could. Not a thief, not a vagrant someone used to punishment. The stall filled slowly with the rhythm of cloth against glass, the scent of spice thickening with the warmth from the small heater. After a while, he asked quietly, "What's your name?" "Erie," she said, without looking up. "Just Erie." Her accent was faintly off-world, soft around the consonants. "Where'd you come from, Erie?" She hesitated, then said, "Freighter docks. I worked, owed them for passage. When I couldn't pay, they said they owned me." Her voice cracked on the last word. Cade's jaw tightened. "You're free of them now." She shook her head slightly. "Not until they stop looking." He didn't press. He'd met too many like her runaways carrying invisible chains. The rest of the day passed in quiet labor. She cleaned the jars, restacked the crates, and even managed to brew a pot of Lauren Mist tea without breaking a single cup. He said little, and she seemed grateful for that. As dusk fell, the rain turned to mist, and the lamps outside painted their reflections on the wet steel deck. Cade closed the ledger and leaned against the counter. "You can stay tonight," he said finally. "There's a cot behind the curtain." Her eyes widened, disbelief flickering across her face. You mean here? Unless you prefer the docks, he said dryly. She shook her head quickly. No, here's fine. He nodded once and turned to close the shutters. When he finished, she was already curled up between two spice crates, her small pack tucked under her arm, the borrowed shirt too large around her shoulders. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Just before she drifted off, he heard her murmur through the quiet, "First place, no one hit me for speaking." Cade froze where he stood. The market outside had gone still, the hum of Orthium a low heartbeat beneath their feet. He watched her for a long moment, the faint rise and fall of her chest, the flicker of green hair in the lamplight, and then turned off the lantern. For the first time in years, the silence in his stall didn't feel empty. It felt like the start of something fragile and real, something that might just matter again, that morning rose in soft teal light that filtered through the young, fog-damp glass of Orthium's lower decks, turning every surface into a dim mirror of the ocean below. Cade Rowan was already awake, moving quietly through the narrow stall, checking the jars that lined the shelves, the scales, the grinder plates. The air smelled of salt and spice, of work yet to be done. When he looked toward the back corner, he saw her curled between crates, the borrowed shirt wrapped tight around her frame. Her violet skin caught the light faintly, as if it remembered the rain from last night. For a long moment, he just watched her breathe, unsure why. When she stirred, her eyes blinked open, alert, cautious. Then she realized where she was, and something in her shoulders loosened. "I thought it was a dream," she murmured. "It's not," he said, placing a steaming cup beside her. "Tea, not strong, but warm." She sat up slowly, the scent of Lauren mist rising between them. "You didn't have to," she whispered. "I did," Cade replied. "Otherwise you'd fall asleep mid-shift." That made her almost smile, a small, uncertain curl at the edge of her mouth. It was the first human expression he'd seen on her face. She drank quietly while he adjusted the awning and lifted the shutters. Outside, Orthium was waking mechanical voices announcing trade schedules, vendors calling out early prices, the low groan of pylons shifting as the floating city adjusted to the morning currents. For a few minutes, they worked in silence. Erie wiped the counter, careful and methodical. Cade refilled the spice jars. The rhythm between them was unspoken, but steady, two people moving in parallel without collision. When the first customers arrived, a pair of ship hands, buying Froen seed for their captain's brewcade, handled the transaction while Erie watched from the side, studying how he weighed, wrapped, and spoke. When the men left, she said quietly, "You don't talk much." He shrugged. "Talking doesn't fix the work." "No," she said, almost to herself. "But sometimes it keeps you from drowning." He looked at her then, really looked. The shadows beneath her eyes spoke of exhaustion beyond sleep. "You were a worker before?" she asked. She nodded. "Freighter maintenance, cargo runs, cleaning. They said debt work would end in 3 cycles. It didn't. How'd you get out?" Her hand froze over the counter. "I didn't. I ran." Cade didn't push. Instead, he reached for a tray of resin cones and handed it to her. "Start with these. It helps to focus on something small." She nodded and went back to wiping. After a while, she asked, "Why'd you hire me?" He thought about it. "Because I could. That's not a reason." He met her gaze. "It's enough of one." The rest of the morning passed in quiet labor. Customers came and went, the stall filling with the rhythm of market life coin clinks, laughter, the hiss of frying oil from the nearby food deck. When a merchant from the upper tier stopped by, his robes lined with gold trim, his tone carried the kind of contempt money often buys. "Didn't think humans hired hybrids," the man said, eyeing Erie with a faint sneer. Cade's hands didn't pause on the scale. I hire workers, he said. Spices don't care who measures them. The man chuckled, low and mocking. Kindness won't keep your business safe. Cade looked up then, his gaze level. Neither will arrogance. The merchant's smirk faded. He left without another word. Eerie stood frozen until he was gone. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. He could cause trouble. Then he'll cause it somewhere else, Cade said. No one talks like that to the people I work with. She blinked, trying to find the right response, but none came. Instead, she went back to her task, her movements faster now, as though she needed to prove she was worth defending. Hours later, when the market began to quiet again, Cade poured 2 cups of tea and set one beside her. They sat in silence, the faint hum of Orthium beneath their feet. Outside, fog curled around the pylons like ghostly vines. You really don't want anything from me? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Work, Cade said. Same as anyone. Most men don't mean that. I'm not most men. She studied him, searching for the catch that wasn't there. Then she nodded slowly and looked down at her cup. I can work, she said, more to herself than to him. I can be good at this? You already are, he said. The words seemed to hit her harder than kindness should. She blinked rapidly and looked away, as if the feeling itself was too bright to hold. When he turned to close the shutters for the night, she was still sitting there, hands folded around the empty cup. A small tremor in her fingers, but a steadiness in her eyes that hadn't been there the night before. Later, when the lights dimmed and she lay back down between the crates, he heard her whisper through the quiet, I'll do better tomorrow. Cade didn't answer. He just listened to her breathing settle, the rhythm slow and even, and realized how long it had been since the sound of another person sleeping hadn't felt like a burden. For the first time in years, the silence inside his stall felt alive. The next morning arrived heavy with humidity, the kind that made Orthium's steel bones sweat. Mist clung to the market decks, turning every sound, the clatter of crates, the hiss of pressure vents, into something muffled, distant. Cade Rowan opened the stall early, wiping condensation from the counter while the first traces of dawn bled through the glass above. He was already awake. She had been for a while, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the spice racks, her green hair tied back with a frayed ribbon, her hands methodically sorting resin cones by size. When she saw him, she gave a small nod instead of a greeting. She'd learned his language of silence. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, slid one toward her, and leaned against the counter. You don't sleep much, he said. Not used to quiet, she replied. Silence feels like waiting for something to go wrong. Then you'll hate this place, he said. Nothing ever happens here? She almost smiled at that, but it didn't last. Her eyes flicked toward the walkway, scanning the passing figures with a kind of restless vigilance. Cade noticed but said nothing. People who had run before never stopped looking over their shoulder. It was a reflex, not paranoia. The first few hours passed in steady rhythm customers, small talk, the clink of credits. Eerie moved through tasks with quiet precision, her motions efficient, the tremor in her hands almost gone. Cade found himself watching her more often than he meant to, not out of curiosity, but because she worked the way he used to, like every motion was a chance to make something right. It wasn't until midday that the calm cracked. Cade was restocking the upper shelf when a voice called out behind him, deep and too familiar in tone, the kind that carried entitlement like perfume. Didn't think I'd find you here. He turned, and the air around him seemed to thicken. A man stood at the edge of the stall, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the worn insignia of a freight crew jacket. The white fabric was stained with engine oil, the badge on his collar marked with a crimson stripe authority of some kind, but not the lawful kind. Behind him, two deckhands lingered like shadows. Eerie froze. The color drained from her face. "Jorvin," she whispered, barely audible. The man smiled, sharp and joyless. "There you are, little hybrid. Captain's been looking for you. You cost him a lot of credits when you ran off with that shuttle." Cade stepped forward, his posture calm but unyielding. "She works here. You're trespassing." Jorvin laughed, not cruelly, but with the confidence of someone used to owning every room he entered. "You must be the charity case handler. Doesn't matter where she hides. That's debt." Erie's hands clenched on the counter, trembling again. "I don't owe him anything," she said, her voice shaking. "I paid with blood and work." "You paid to exist," Jorvin said, leaning closer. "And you still owe for the privilege." Cade's tone stayed level, but there was iron under it. "You're done here. You going to make me leave, old man?" Jorvin asked, stepping closer. Cade didn't move. "If I have to." The two deckhands shifted, uncertain. The air in the stall grew tense, the market noise outside dimming to a hum. For a long heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Jorvin smirked. "Not worth the trouble. You'll see me again soon, hybrid." He stepped back, turned, and disappeared into the passing crowd. Cade waited until their footsteps vanished before turning to Erie. Her breathing was fast, uneven. She stared at the spot where Jorvin had stood as if afraid to blink. "He found me," she whispered. "They always find me." "He's gone," Cade said. "For now." She looked at him, her eyes wet but fierce. "You don't understand. The captain doesn't let go. He'll come back." Cade's jaw tightened. "Then he'll find you working, not hiding." "You should have let me leave," she said. "Now he'll bring trouble to your door." "I've had worse," he said. "And I'm still standing." She turned away, gripping the edge of the counter. "You don't know what he's capable of." "Maybe not," Cade said, lowering his voice. "But I know what I am." His tone made her look up. There was no bravado in it, just quiet certainty. For the first time since she'd arrived, she saw not a merchant, but a man who'd spent a lifetime facing storms and never once turning away. She wanted to believe him. That night, the market closed early. Rain returned, heavier this time, striking the sails with metallic rhythm. Cade reinforced the shutters, while Erie sat near the heater, knees drawn to her chest. "What'll you do if he comes back?" she asked softly. "The same thing I did today," Cade said. "Tell him to leave. And if he doesn't, then I stop asking." The simplicity of it made her shiver. When he was done securing the stall, he sat across from her, their reflections faint in the window's rain-slick glass. The silence stretched until she finally said, "I wasn't just a worker on that ship." Cade waited. "The cargo codes," she continued, voice trembling. "They were tied to me. My blood. The captain used hybrids like me to bypass system scans. We were ... components, living security keys." She looked up at him then, eyes raw with exhaustion. "That's why he wants me back. Without me, he loses access to every route he's been smuggling through." Cade leaned back slowly, absorbing it. The market outside moaned under the wind. "So you didn't steal from him," he said quietly. "You escaped being stolen." She blinked, stunned by the phrasing. For the first time, the weight in her shoulders seemed to ease, if only slightly. "You should run," she said. "If he thinks you're helping me, he'll come for you too." Cade met her gaze evenly. "Then he'll find I'm harder to move than he is." The storm thickened, rain lashing the shutters, thunder rolling across the floating city. Erie flinched at every crack, but when Cade rose and placed a spare blanket beside her, she whispered, "You really don't scare easily, do you?" "Spent half my life chasing disasters," he said. Kind of gets boring when they stop chasing back. She smiled faintly, a fragile, flickering thing in the dim light. "Thank you," she said, and when he didn't ask for what, she added, "for seeing me as more than what I ran from." Cade said nothing. He just sat near the window, watching the storm. The sound of rain filled the silence between them, loud, relentless, alive. And in that sound, the fear that had ruled the stall all day began to soften, replaced by something quieter, heavier, and far more dangerous. Hope. Orthium's morning broke beneath a bruised sky, the storm still lingering like an echo that refused to fade. The air was thick with salt and static, every breath tasting faintly of ozone. Cade Rowan stood at the edge of the stall, watching condensation bead on the glass canopy above. The market was slow to wake, traders moving with the weary caution of people who'd slept through thunder. Inside the stall, Eerie wiped the counter in slow, methodical circles. She hadn't spoken much since the night before. The shadows beneath her eyes told him she hadn't slept. Cade didn't press her. Words weren't a salve she trusted yet. Instead, he checked the latches on the shutters again, testing each one with quiet precision. He'd reinforced them with scrap plating from a broken cargo crate, ugly but solid. "Expecting another storm?" she asked finally, her voice softer than usual. "Always," he said. "Weather's the least of our worries." She didn't argue. When the market finally stirred, Orthium's hum returned, 1,000 voices, layered with the hiss of vents and the mechanical grind of the city's pylons adjusting their balance above the sea. Cade felt the rhythm of it, steady but uneasy, the way the air feels before lightning strikes. The first half of the day passed without trouble. A handful of customers came and went, dockhands, cooks, a few engineers from the underdecks buying spice and tea. Eerie served them with quiet skill, her movements precise, her words measured. Cade noticed how she no longer flinched when someone's voice rose or a door slammed outside. She was learning the market's language, the difference between noise and danger. For a moment, he allowed himself to think that maybe Jorvin had moved on. But peace on Orthium never lasted long. It was late afternoon when the shadows shifted. Cade caught the flicker first, a reflection of white fabric across the walkway. When he looked up, Jorvin was standing there again, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, broad-shouldered and silent, the kind of muscle that didn't talk unless paid to. The crowd around them thinned instinctively. No one wanted to be near trouble. "Afternoon," Jorvin said, his voice oily smooth. "Told you I'd be back." Cade didn't move from behind the counter. "You've had your warning, and you've had your fun pretending she's free," Jorvin said. "But business is business. The captain wants what's his." Eerie's hands froze on the tray she was stacking. Her eyes darted to Cade, then to the walkway. "Nowhere to run." "You're not taking her," Cade said. "You've got 3 seconds to walk away." Jorvin's smirk widened. "You forget where you are. Human. The market authority doesn't police that law. She's property until the contract says otherwise." Cade stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "You think contracts make you right?" "They make me rich," Jorvin said, nodding to his men. The first moved toward the stall, reaching for Ares' arm. She backed away instinctively, knocking a jar from the counter. It shattered, resin dust spilling across the floor in a sharp, bitter cloud. The noise drew eyes from the neighboring stalls, but no one intervened. Cade's body moved before his mind did. He caught the man's wrist mid-reach and twisted, not enough to break, just enough to make a point. The man grunted, dropping his grip. "Touch her again," Cade said quietly, "and I'll take your hand off." The second man stepped forward, but Jorvin raised a hand, stopping him. His eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake. You don't know who she is." I know enough, Cade said. She's not yours. You think she told you the truth? Jorvin said, voice sharp now. You think she ran because she was a victim? She ran because she stole from us. Codes, data, cargo manifests. The kind that can ruin people. Cade didn't flinch. Then maybe they deserved it. You don't even know what she is, Jorvin hissed. She's not just hybrid. She's tech-built to interface with navigation systems. She's a living key, and you're hiding her in a spice stall like a pet. Erie's breath caught. Cade's eyes flicked to her, then back to him. Keys open things, he said evenly. Doors, cages. Depends who's holding them. Jorvin's sneer cracked. You'll regret this. Maybe, Cade said. But not today. For a moment, no one moved. Rain began again, thin and cold, tapping against the glass like a warning. Jorvin finally straightened his jacket, signaled his men, and turned away. You can't keep her, he said over his shoulder. The captain won't stop until she's back. Cade waited until they disappeared into the crowd before turning to Erie. She stood motionless, the color drained from her face. You heard him, she whispered. I'm not even a person. I'm code. You're standing here, breathing, Cade said. That's person enough. You should have let them take me, she said, voice trembling. You don't know what you've done. I know exactly what I've done, he said, locking the shutters. And I'll do it again if I have to. She stared at him, searching his face for any trace of doubt. There was none. Outside, thunder rolled low across the ocean, a sound like something vast shifting beneath the waves. Erie sat down heavily on the bench, her hands covering her face. They won't stop. You can't fight them all. I don't need to fight them all, Cade said. Just the ones who come through that door. She looked up at him then, eyes shining in the dim light. Why, you don't even know me. Cade exhaled slowly, leaning against the counter. Because I do, he said. You're someone who asked for help instead of dying. That's enough for me. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the roof until it drowned out the hum of the city. Erie's breathing steadied, and she wiped her eyes, sitting straighter. You don't scare easily, she said quietly. You get used to fear when you've seen worse, Cade replied. What could be worse than this? She asked. He gave a faint, tired smile. Losing the reason you bothered to fight. She didn't have an answer to that. When night came, Orthium shimmered in the stormlight, its decks alive with flickering reflections. Inside the stall, they worked in silence, reinforcing the shutters, sorting jars, pretending not to listen for footsteps outside. When the last light dimmed, Cade poured 2 cups of tea. They sat across from each other, steam rising between them. For the first time, she met his gaze and didn't look away. In that fragile quiet, something shifted small, unspoken, and entirely human. The world beyond the glass could burn, but inside the stall, for a few stolen hours, they were no longer prey or protector. They were just 2 souls waiting for the storm to pass. The storm didn't break so much as dissolve. By morning, Orthium floated in a shroud of pale mist, the horizon lost in light that felt neither day nor night. Cade Rowan hadn't slept. He sat by the shuttered window, watching beads of water roll down the glass, tracing uneven paths toward the steel deck below. The city creaked and shifted around him, 1,000 quiet groans of metal and current. Behind him, Erie moved like a shadow tidying what didn't need cleaning, stacking jars that were already straight. She hadn't spoken since Jorvin's visit. The silence wasn't awkward, only heavy, like air before thunder. When she finally stopped, her voice was low but steady. He'll be back. Cade didn't look away from the window. I know. You don't understand, she said, stepping closer. You don't just walk away from people like them. The captain, he builds loyalty out of fear. Jorvin's only the beginning. Cade turned then, and for the first time she saw exhaustion behind his eyes. Not weakness, but the kind that comes from carrying too many battles alone. "You're right," he said quietly. "So maybe it's time we stop running." Her brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, standing, "we bring this into the light." He crossed to the workbench and pulled out a battered datapad, its surface scratched and dim. "You said the captain used your blood as a key something that links to the freighter's cargo codes." She nodded, wary. "They're encrypted into the genetic markers of hybrids like me. We were made that way, human enough to be adaptable, alien enough to bypass security. The codes are stored in us, not on us." Cade tapped the screen, lines of numbers and log entries flickering to life. "Then that's our leverage. If we show what he's doing, if we make it public, he can't touch you without exposing himself." Her eyes widened. "That's suicide. The market authorities look the other way for men like him. They'd bury it in me." "Maybe," he said, "but we'll make it too loud to ignore." He met her gaze. "You want to be free? Then we stop hiding and we tell the truth." For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of Orthium's engines beneath their feet. Eerie stared at him, torn between disbelief and something that felt dangerously close to hope. "You'd risk that? For me?" Cade didn't answer right away. He looked at her, the streaks of green in her hair, catching the faint light, the faint tremor in her fingers that never seemed to fully stop. "For you," he said finally, "and for every person like you they think they own." She exhaled shakily, the breath catching in her throat. "Then we do it." That night, they left the stall together. The upper decks of Orthium were a different world, sterile corridors, silver floors that reflected the soft pulse of neon lights, the air dry and too clean. They moved quietly, keeping to service paths until they reached the administrative hub of the Port Authority. A few officials lingered near the data terminals, too tired or indifferent to care who came and went. Cade approached a terminal, hands steady, and inserted the pad. "Once I upload this, there's no taking it back," he said. "Every trade log tied to the captain's ship, every smuggling manifest, every genetic registry, they'll all trace to him." Erie's voice trembled. "And to me." "Then let them see you," he said. "Not as a number, as proof." She swallowed hard and pressed her hand to the reader. The screen pulsed crimson, then gold, scanning the faint bioluminescent veins under her skin. Data spilled like rain across the display routes, ship IDs, code fragments, dates. It was a confession written in her DNA. Cade hit confirm. The upload began. Alarms didn't sound. No guards rushed forward. Just a quiet chime as the system accepted the transmission. "It's done," Cade said. "It's out there now." Erie stood motionless, her breath fogging the glass in front of her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. "What happens now?" She whispered. "Now," he said, "we go home." By the time they returned to the lower decks, Orthium was awake again. Market lights flickered to life, voices rising from the walkways. Cade reopened the stall as if nothing had changed, as if the world hadn't just shifted under them. But people were already whispering. News traveled fast on a floating city. Traders glanced their way, some curious, others wary. Erie felt their eyes and tried not to shrink under them. Then, out of the crowd, a woman approached a middle-aged merchant with ink-stained fingers and kind eyes. "You did it," she said to Erie, voice low. "The broadcast. They're saying a hybrid exposed the smuggling network. Saved a lot of lives." Erie blinked. "They're saying that?" "Not everyone," the woman said with a faint smile. "But enough." When she left, Erie turned to Cade. "You think this will actually matter?" "It already does," he said. "You spoke, and they listened." For a brief moment, peace settled between them. Then the world tilted again. Cade saw him first a shape at the far end of the walkway, framed in the amber glow of the market lamps. Jorvin. Alone, but slower now, his gait uneven. When he came close enough, Cade saw the burns on his arm, the torn sleeve, the hollow rage behind his eyes. "Captain's dead," Jorvin rasped, voice brittle. "Reactor failure. 2 nights ago." Erie's blood ran cold. "You're lying." "Check the feeds," he said. "Blew half the ship apart." But his logs didn't die with him. He looked at her, then at Cade. "You think you freed yourself? You just made every scavenger in the sector come looking for you. Those codes are worth more than either of you combined." He stepped closer, rain dripping from his hair. "Give me the access keys, and maybe I'll let you both walk away." Cade's jaw tightened. "You don't get to ask for mercy after what you've done." "Mercy?" Jorvin laughed, a hollow sound. "You think this is about vengeance? I just want to live. Those codes are the only way off this sinking rock." Cade didn't move. "Then you'll have to find another way." The silence stretched thin, heavy as a blade. Then Jorvin's expression broke into something desperate and ugly. "You don't even know what you're protecting," he said to Cade. "She's not who you think. Those codes, she is the codes. You kill the signal, you kill her." He turned to Erie, his voice softening to a mock whisper. Tell him what they made you into." Erie shook her head, her voice cracking. "Stop, tell him." Jorvin barked. "Tell him what happens when someone tries to copy your blood." Cade's breath caught. Erie's silence said everything. Jorvin smiled faintly, the expression of a man who knew he'd already lost, but wanted someone else to bleed before he went. "You see?" he said. "She's not free. She never will be." Cade stepped forward, eyes like iron. "Then maybe the system that made her shouldn't exist either." Jorvin opened his mouth to speak, but Cade's voice cut through him. "Walk away." For the first time, Jorvin did. He turned, his shoulders sagging, and disappeared into the mist. When he was gone, Cade looked at Erie. She stood pale and trembling, tears streaking her cheeks. "It's true," she whispered. "If anyone replicates my genetic data, it destroys the source. That's why the captain kept us alive." Cade reached for her, gently resting a hand on her arm. "Then no one else gets to use you again." She looked up at him, eyes full of exhaustion and something like faith. "And if they come anyway?" "Then we remind them who they're dealing with." The rain outside thickened again, blurring the glass until the world beyond became only color and sound. In the small circle of light that belonged to them, Cade and Erie stood close, not in fear, but in understanding. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time, it didn't matter. They'd already decided to stand in it together. The next morning came in fragments of gray light, breaking through the mist, the ocean below Orthium, still restless from the storm that had passed. Cade Rowan sat by the stall window, the shutters half open, letting in the wet breeze that carried the scent of salt and ozone. The market outside was quieter than usual, voices low, movements cautious, like the city itself was holding its breath after what had happened. He hadn't slept again, though exhaustion clung to him like another layer of damp air. He turned a small tin cup in his hands, listening to the hum beneath the deck. The Arium's engines thrummed faintly, a sound that had always comforted him. Behind him, Erie stirred. She sat up on the cot, her hair a disheveled tangle of green against the white of the borrowed linen shirt, her violet skin pale in the morning light. For a moment she just watched him, quiet, unsure if she should speak. "You didn't sleep," she said finally. "Neither did you," he replied. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Seems to be a pattern. Storms don't end just because the sky clears, Cade said, glancing toward the mist. Sometimes they just move underneath. She rose barefoot, the floor cold beneath her. You think he'll come back? Cade shook his head. No, Jorvin's the kind that runs when he's out of leash. He didn't say the rest, that others might come instead, drawn by the codes, the data that now spread like wildfire through every trade channel. He could already feel the tension in the air, the invisible eyes of a city that thrived on rumors. The broadcast Erie made had changed Orthium. It had peeled back a layer of civility and shown the rot beneath, the human and alien traffickers, the smugglers, the quiet complicity of the Port Authority. Somewhere above, deals were unraveling, and at the heart of it all was her. Erie poured herself a cup of tea, hands still trembling slightly. If I'm really what he said, I am if I'm connected to those systems. What happens now? What if someone uses the codes to trace me? Then they'll find me first, Cade said simply. Because you're not alone anymore. She met his gaze, her expression caught between disbelief and relief. You make that sound easy. Nothing about this is easy, he said. But I stopped running from hard things a long time ago. She stared down at the tea, the steam rising between them. The captain's dead. Jorvin's gone. You could walk away from this. Pretend you never met me. I could, Cade said. But I won't. There was a pause, soft, fragile, and filled with things neither of them knew how to name. Then a sound broke it, the faint hum of an incoming transmission. Cade's communicator flashed on the counter. He picked it up, expecting static or spam, but a woman's voice came through, calm, official, layered with the clipped tone of authority. This is Commander Valen of the Port Authority, it said. Mr. Rowan, Ms. Erie Venner, you're requested to attend an inquiry regarding last night's data breach. Cade frowned. Inquiry? Your actions have exposed significant violations in multiple trade sectors, Valen continued. The Council intends to grant Ms. Venner protected status under the Interspecies Refugee Code, but there are complications. Complications, Cade repeated dryly. We'll send an escort within the hour. The transmission cut. The stall fell silent again. Erie looked at him, her expression unreadable. Protected, she said, the word small, uncertain. That means safety, doesn't it? It means paperwork, Cade said, setting the device down. Safety comes later. True to the commander's word, 2 port officers arrived before noon. Their uniforms gleamed too clean for the lower decks, and their eyes avoided contact with the staring merchants as they escorted Cade and E-Ray through the glass corridors that led to the upper ring. Orthium's administrative sector looked like another world-polished steel, scentless air, walls that gleamed with embedded light. They were led into a circular chamber where Commander Valen waited, tall, sharp-featured, her gaze quick and assessing. You caused quite a ripple, Miss Venner, Valen said without preamble. Half the smugglers in the sector are burning their manifests as we speak. Erie stood straight, but said nothing. And you, Valen added, turning to Cade, you've taken responsibility for aiding her. I hired her, he said. I gave her work. That's not a crime. No, Valen said. But what she carries might be. She turned to a screen behind her. Rows of data scrolled across genetic strings, cargo registry numbers, encrypted routes. These codes you released, she said. Our analysts traced them. They don't just link to illegal transport logs. They connect to an old Federation experiment project Halcyon. Human genetic prototypes designed for bionavigation. Hybrid pilots. The precursor to what the captain used. Cade's stomach dropped. Project Halcyon? It was shut down decades ago, Valen said. Or so we thought. She turned to Eerie. Your DNA sequence is partially derived from the original human templates. Which means, Cade interrupted, voice low. Which means she's one of ours. The words hung between them like a wound reopening. Valen studied him. You served in the Search and Recovery Course, didn't you, Rowan? That division handled the aftermath of the Halcyon collapse. It seems your old employers had a hand in what she became. Cade's throat felt dry. We pulled survivors out of burning domes, he said quietly. We didn't know what caused them to burn. Eerie looked at him, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding. You were part of it, she said softly. Not this, he said quickly. I didn't know. But you helped clean it up, she said. Her voice wasn't angry, just hollow. You helped hide what they did. Cade didn't argue. There was no defense worth speaking. The truth had finally found its way back to him, wearing her face. Commander Valen cleared her throat. Regardless of what came before, Miss Venner, your testimony and genetic evidence have secured legal recognition for all hybrid cases under review. You've changed policy across 3 systems. That's no small thing. Eerie nodded faintly, but her eyes never left Cade. When they were dismissed, neither spoke as they descended back toward the lower decks. The silence between them wasn't cold. It was heavy, full of truths that couldn't be unsaid. By the time they reached the stall again, the sun had broken through the clouds, turning the sea below into sheets of shifting silver. Cade stood at the window, the reflection of light cutting across his face. Eerie came to stand beside him. You knew, she said finally. Not about me, but about what they were capable of. I knew the system was broken, he said quietly. I just didn't realize how deep the cracks went. You were part of the machine, she said. And now you're trying to fix it. Maybe, he said. Or maybe I'm just trying to keep one piece from breaking again. She watched him for a long time, the light catching in her eyes. Then don't stop, she said. Whatever comes next, don't stop. Outside, the sails above Orthium unfurled in the wind, glowing with gold and turquoise as the sun caught their edges. The storm was gone, but the air still hummed with energy, the sound of a city waking to new laws, new fears, new hope. Cade reached across the counter, his hand brushing hers, and this time she didn't pull away. The world outside would keep moving, ships rising, markets shouting, systems breaking and rebuilding, but for a brief, perfect moment, the stall was still. It was enough. Orthium drifted on above the endless ocean, carrying with it 2 souls who had finally stopped running from their pasts, from their guilt, and from the quiet mercy of being seen.